The blizzard was already turning the world into a white roaring void when former Navy SEAL Daniel Hale slammed the truck door open and stepped into the storm. Because the moment he saw the stranded family on the roadside, one woman clutching a newborn while four terrified little girls huddled against her, something inside him tightened with the same instinct that had kept him alive on battlefields where hesitation meant death. Daniel wasn't out here by choice. He had been heading toward a remote cabin to escape a memory he didn't want to face. But his German shepherd, Ranger, had suddenly begun growling at the window, pressing his body forward, music, as if warning that something ahead was very wrong. And Daniel had learned long ago that Rare's instincts were never mistaken. Before we begin, don't forget to hit like, repost, or share, and subscribe. And I'm really curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. Back to the story. As Daniel pushed through the biting wind and snowflakes that stung like ice shards, he saw the woman turn toward him with a look that mixed desperation, fear, and exhausted disbelief, as though she couldn't decide whether he was a threat or a miracle. Her voice trembled when she tried to speak, but the storm swallowed most of the sound, and Daniel had to step closer to hear her shaky words as she insisted they were all right, even though her lips were pale, her hands shaking violently, and the newborn in her arms barely moved. The girls kept glancing from the storm to Ranger, who stood tall beside Daniel, ears forward but calm. Music, sensing the children's fear and offering them silent reassurance without taking a single step toward them. Daniel raised a gloved hand slowly, not wanting to overwhelm them, and explained that he was a former SEAL trained for emergencies far worse than this storm, and even though he didn't know who they were or why they were alone in the middle of nowhere, he could see clearly that if they stayed where they were, the cold would claim them before the night ended. The woman's breath hitched, and when she finally whispered her name, Mara, it came with a trembling confession that their car had died hours ago. The storm had trapped them, and she had tried to keep her children moving along the road until her legs simply gave out. As Daniel listened, the pieces began to fall into a disturbing pattern, especially when Mara revealed that they weren't simply stranded, they were running. Her husband had died only a month earlier, and since then his brother had become increasingly unstable, showing up at her home, making threats and demanding things she refused to give. When Mara realized he wouldn't stop, she took the children, packed whatever she could carry, and fled, heading toward distant relatives she barely knew, hoping she could reach them before her brother-in-law found her. But the storm arrived before she reached safety, and now she was out of time. The baby let out a faint cry, thin and weak, and Daniel Music felt something in his chest twist with the same protective instinct he once felt for injured comrades. He stepped closer, offering the warmth of his coat, and when Mara didn't pull away, he knew. Music. She understood she had no other choice left. Ranger moved beside the children, Music, positioning himself between them and the wind, and the little girls instinctively pressed closer to his thick fur, trusting him without being told. Daniel gathered the baby carefully into his arms, his voice steady but urgent as he told Mara they needed to move now before the cold stole any chance they had left. With an exhausted nod, Mara helped her daughters follow Ranger toward the truck, each step a battle against the unforgiving wind. When Daniel finally guided them inside and blasted the heat, he saw the relief wash over Mara's face like someone who had been fighting alone for far too long. But as he put the truck in drive and the blizzard swallowed the road ahead, Daniel noticed something unsettling in the side mirror. Fresh tire tracks that didn't belong to him, cutting sharply across the snow, as though someone else had been following the same lonely road, and had stopped exactly where Mara and the children had been standing minutes earlier. Daniel kept his eyes fixed on the mirror far longer than he should have while driving through a storm that could swallow a truck whole, because those tire tracks weren't random patterns in the snow. They were fresh, sharp, and deep, made by a vehicle that had stopped exactly where Mara and the children had been standing, which meant someone had been close, too close. And the idea of a dangerous man hunting a woman carrying a newborn through a blizzard made every protective instinct in Daniel's body ignite like wildfire. As the truck groaned against the wind and Ranger remained pressed between the seats, watching Mara's daughters with calm alertness, Daniel lowered his voice and asked her whether anyone could have followed her through the mountains, and the way she tensed before answering told him everything even before she spoke. Mara admitted that her brother-in-law owned an old truck with chains on the tires, a truck loud enough to recognize even from far away, and she had heard something like it earlier on the road. But because the storm was building so quickly, she convinced herself it had to be a plow or a rancher trying to outrun the weather. She never slowed down long enough to be sure, because she couldn't afford to confirm the fear that he really was behind her, hunting her through a storm that should have forced any sane man indoors. Her voice cracked when she explained how he had become more unstable every day after her husband's death, and how the grief twisted into anger, then obsession, then something darker that made her flee before it escalated beyond threats. Daniel listened with the same steady focus he used during missions when every detail mattered, because he understood perfectly how desperation could make people dangerous, and he knew a storm like this could push a violent man past the last line of reason. As Ranger shifted and rested his head gently on the lap of one of the little girls, calming her trembling hands, Daniel made a decision he didn't fully voice yet. A decision that came from the part of him that had spent years dragging injured teammates out of places no one survived. He told Mara they wouldn't be going to any motel or rest stop on the highway. Instead, he was taking them to his cabin, isolated, stocked, and built strong enough to withstand storms far worse than this one. And although Mara hesitated, her exhaustion and fear were stronger than her doubts. The drive up the mountain road felt endless, the truck pushing through drifts that reached nearly halfway up the doors. The world outside transformed into a swirling white tunnel that seemed determined to bury everything in silence. Mara kept looking at the baby to make sure he was breathing, while the girls leaned against each other for warmth, stealing comfort from Rare's steady presence. When Daniel finally saw the cabin lights cut through the wall of snow, he felt the first flicker of relief, because once inside those walls, he could assess, protect, and plan. The moment they stepped through the door, the heat from the old stone fireplace wrapped around them like a shield, and Daniel immediately moved to secure the windows, check the perimeter, and make sure no tire tracks followed them past the main road. Ranger patrolled the cabin's edges without being told, his instincts already keyed to danger, and when he stopped at the back door and growled low in his throat, Daniel knew the tension in his chest had been justified. Mara saw the look Daniel exchanged with Ranger and whispered in a shaking voice that she never wanted her children to be afraid again, and Daniel promised her she would not face this night alone because he had every intention of standing between her family and whatever approached through the storm. As wind battered the cabin walls, and the fire crackled beneath the weight of the blizzard, Daniel took one final look outside and saw the faint, unmistakable glow of headlights far down the mountain road, slow, steady, and searching, proving that the man hunting Mara had not turned back and the night was far from over. This story touched millions of hearts. If it touched yours, let us know with a like.